In recent months, Donald Trump has proposed invading Mexico, annexing Canada, expropriating the Panama Canal, and what we're going to talk about in today's video, buying Greenland. Yes, I know it sounds like we're talking about an Age of Empires game, but I promise you, this is all real. In fact, this is not the first time Trump has flirted with buying the region. He already did it in his previous term. It's just that he was most likely stopped in his tracks. Now, however, everything has changed. In this new legislature, Trump has full support of his party. He controls both the Senate and Congress. The Supreme Court has a Republican majority, and what can I say? His support is at historic highs. In other words, Trump is going to have a free hand to push his vision for America, and the Greenland purchase is part of it. Everyone treats these speeches almost as if they were jokes, although Trump himself keeps repeating that he is completely serious. Now, to buy Greenland, there has to be a seller, and its current owner is Denmark, which, as you can imagine, is not very keen on selling the region.
Greenland belongs to the Greenlanders, says Danish PM as Donald Trump Jr. arrives.
Let's face it, Trump is not going to buy Greenland. That's completely unthinkable. But that doesn't mean he's not going to try to make operations less invasive. Trump has reason to want Arctic island dominance, and buyout or no buyout, he seems poised to get it. So today on Visualeconomik, we pose the following questions. What are the motives behind Trump wanting Greenland to be the new state of the United States? What could this island bring to the American empire? Is it madness or genius on the part of the American tycoon? Let's get started. What the hell is Greenland? A country? Well, technically, no. The island, with fewer than 57,000 inhabitants, covered 80% by ice, which is also the largest island in the world, excluding the continents, is an autonomous territory of Denmark. The short story is that the Norwegian-Danish kingdom annexed it, and Denmark kept it when those kingdoms split. Of course, the vast majority of its inhabitants are not Danish or Norwegian, but Inuit, the misnamed Eskimos. With the Danish Constitution of 1953, all Greenlanders became full citizens of Denmark, and 26 years later, there was a referendum in which they were given much more autonomy. This was repeated again in 2008, when another referendum transferred even more powers to the Greenlandic government and left the door open to full independence. What's more, Greenlandic is the only official language of the territory, and the island even had the autonomy to leave the European community due to the fishing regulations it wanted to impose on them. However, Greenland is still a European overseas territory, and Greenlanders are still considered European citizens, with all the legal advantages that implies to go and live in another EU country, for example. The only thing Greenlanders notice Denmark's hand in is their currency and foreign policy. Well, there is one more thing: subsidies. Denmark sends huge amounts of public money to the Inuit. To give you an idea, half of the public revenues are transfers from Denmark. We're talking about an annual subsidy of around $600 million for a population of fewer than 60,000 people. In other words, we're talking about $10,000 per head in direct subsidies alone. To this must be added all the millions paid by the European Union for fishing rights, and those sent as development aid. Yes, it helps development. Why? Well, I don't know either, because in spite of everything, the region has a GDP per capita of $57,000, so they live on subsidies even though they are rich. What's more, in Greenland, there are hardly any private companies or anything like that, but rather most Greenlanders follow the Saudi Arabian model. Almost all are civil servants. For example, 40% of workers in the fishing industry work for a government-owned company. In any case, none of this answers our questions. What the hell is Donald Trump looking for in this country? Well, the first reason is clear: oil. The US Geological Survey estimates that the Arctic contains 13% of the undiscovered oil and 30% of the undiscovered natural gas. Greenland is a kind of giant oil loot box. It's not known exactly how much it has, but the prize could be a massive one. In fact, Greenland has already been trying to exploit some of these deposits for a decade. The objective? To stop living on Danish and European subsidies and to make natural resources profitable. And don't think that we're talking only about oil. In fact, the US is already an oil power thanks to fracking. So its interests are not so much in black gold, but in other resources of the island, rare earths. Of the 50 strategic minerals esteemed by the US government, those rare earths on which the technology sector, for example, depends, Greenland has abundant quantities of at least 43. There are estimates that Greenland has 50% of all the rare earths on the planet. Although this figure should be taken with a pinch of salt, it explains why the number of boreholes has increased from 12 to 170 in just 10 years. But let's face it, it, if there's one word that perfectly defines Greenland's mining operations, it's disappointing. For what reason? Well, because the reason why, until now, all these resources have not been exploited is due to the ice. It's one thing to make mines, and another to make mines when you have meters and meters of glaciers on the surface. A few years ago, it was thought that thanks to climate change and the glacial melting, establishing mines on the island would be a piece of cake, and that the Inuit would be thrilled with them. The problem? There were several. For one thing, the technology is still in its infancy, and the ice sheets are still too large for large-scale extraction to be profitable. Number two, not only do we need mines and oil platforms, but also a whole lot of infrastructure. Keep in mind that after all these rare earths are extracted, they have to be transported. Some of these sites are almost 3,000 kilometers from the capital, Nuuk, and very far from any other large settlement. We're talking about a distance comparable to that between Paris and Moscow. And believe me when I tell you that Greenland is not exactly famous for its railroad network. What's more, miners and engineers going to Greenland need a place to stay. They need catering, people to transport food to them. In short, a whole logistical network that would have to be created virtually from scratch. But there's still the third problem, the protectionism of the Inuit. This group represents 88% of the island's inhabitants, and don't imagine they're too happy about having foreigners drilling on their land, even if there are currently no humans within 1,000 kilometers of the drilling site. Also keep in mind that Greenland has fewer than 60,000 inhabitants, so bringing in workers for the mines will greatly change the demographic composition of the country. And do you think that amuses the Inuit? No, it does not. In other words, the Inuit don't have the capacity to exploit these deposits themselves, but they don't want a whole lot of foreigners to come and do it either. At the end of the day, it's always easier to live off subsidies. And you're probably thinking, foreigners could provide the technology, and the Inuit could provide the labor. But of course, remember that there's hardly any private initiative in Greenland. Almost everyone there is a civil servant, so they have no motivation to go to work on these projects. And if you add to all this the fact that the ministry's office that manages environmental permits and regulations has barely 16 workers, then you will surely understand why mining in this country has been so disappointing. But that's not the worst of it. Greenland's resources would be perfect for competing against China in modern industry, and they would be ideal for advancing green technologies such as electric cars that require batteries made from minerals. In other words, Greenlanders do not do their part to repay the cost of the aid, but at the same time, they don't contribute anything to advancing the green technologies that they advocate so much in theory. In short, pretty ridiculous. In any case, this is only part of the story. Ukraine, for instance, also has mountains, literally, of rare earths, and Trump doesn't seem to be dying to help Zelensky in the war and thus guarantee his supply. And let's see, all this natural resources stuff is all well and good, but it doesn't go nearly far enough to explaining why Trump wants to buy the island. So then, what is the major reason? Well, he let us know that himself.
Merry Christmas to all, including to the wonderful soldiers of China. Likewise, to the people of Greenland, which is needed by the United States for national security purposes, and who want the US to be there, and we will.
National security. This is the key that differentiates Greenland from, I don't know, Trump's other idea of annexing Canada. And guess what? This isn't the first time the US has proposed something similar either. In the past, the US bought Louisiana, Florida, and Alaska, also at a bargain price, for just $590 million in today's dollars, about 2.5 times what it cost Paris Saint-Germain to sign Neymar. What's more, it wouldn't even be the first time the US has bought territory from Denmark. Take the US Virgin Islands that it purchased in 1917. And why did the US buy these islands? Well, for the same reason that, even back during World War II, it proposed to Denmark to buy Greenland from them for national security. Come on, this Trump thing may be crazy, but it's not an original craziness entirely of his own making. In fact, there was a much older attempt in 1867, this time for commercial reasons.
His commercial reasoning, based on the facts in the report, highlighted several key resources. These included the superb fisheries of both Iceland and Greenland, Iceland's vast beds of lignite, and its rich and extensive sulfur mountains, whose possession he regarded as a matter of vital magnitude for the United States. Additionally, he emphasized Greenland's valuable coal and apparently inexhaustible cryolite deposits, as well as the potential for summer ocean steam navigation from Greenland's northern harbors.
In the end, Congress threw out this proposal before an official offer was made by Denmark. But what is interesting is that already in the 19th century, we see a reference to something that is fundamental today, the Arctic trade routes. And which countries have their eyes on these routes besides the US, Russia, and China? This is how the great collaboration between these countries to take over the Arctic was born. The Polar Silk Road. The Polar Silk Road would be a trade route that would allow China to trade with the US and Europe without going through the Suez Canal or circumnavigating Africa. With this route increasingly plausible due to the melting of the Arctic ice, China could make the same journey that used to take 30 to 35 days in just 18 days, a dramatic improvement in efficiency, and not in just terms of efficiency, but also in terms of safety. Let's face it, in the Arctic, there's no group of Houthis trying to fill the sea with mines, but at the time when Putin and Xi Jinping announced this collaboration, they seemed like the best friends in the world. Putin was delighted, and China already saw itself as the owner of the Arctic. These days, however, things are very, very different. The Ukraine war has made Russia a global pariah, and even China doesn't want much to do with them. So the whole Arctic polar route thing is on ice, pun intended. To give you an idea, the Chinese military had plans to build a nuclear icebreaker, a type of vessel in which Russia has a lot of experience. But in the end, it has opted for a traditional icebreaker, simply so that it doesn't have to depend on Russia. China has also made some hydrocarbon investments in this area, but none too large for the potential of the region. And it seems that Russia does not trust China too much either, because it opted to include Japan in these investments, so that the Chinese would not have so much influence. With friends like that, I don't know who needs enemies. Even so, the risk that China will end up controlling these important Arctic routes is still there, which explains why Trump wants to buy Greenland, which would give the US strong presence in the region. And by the way, it also explains his other idea of expropriating the Panama Canal. This canal was built by the Americans, leased in perpetuity for Uncle Sam's support of Panama in its war of independence against Colombia. However, after many local protests, Jimmy Carter, who died just a few months ago, gave them the territory, which became official on 31st of December 1999. Since then, China has gained considerable influence in the canal and manages two major ports, one on the Pacific and the other on the Atlantic. But realistically, it doesn't seem that the Panamanians are very interested in giving the US back the canal, especially after having spent almost a decade investing 4% of their GDP in expanding it. And in case it hasn't been made clear enough, neither Denmark nor the Greenland Home Rule government want anything like that either, even if Trump claims the Inuit are crazy about having an American passport. To almost all intents and purposes, Greenland is already an independent region and will not want to be dependent on another country after all the protests against the Danes. And the Danes also don't want to lose control of such a promising region, given the huge amount of money they have been sending there every year. Still, we're likely to see further attempts by the Trump administration to expand its influence in the region. Who knows? Maybe the US will end up becoming the Inuits' biggest ally in their fight against Denmark. Now, having come this far, it's your turn. Did you know about Greenland's economic potential? Do you think Trump is serious, or is he just being a showman again? Will the US succeed in expanding its presence in the Arctic before China completes its Polar Silk Road? You can leave me your answers down in the comments. And as always, don't forget that here on Visualeconomik, we release new videos every week, so subscribe to this channel and hit the little bell so you don't miss any of our updates. If you like this video, like it, and I'll see you in the next one. All the best, I'll see you next time.